The morning of the activation dawned like any other on Varethka, with the twin suns rising over the endless desert and the heat beginning its relentless assault on the cracked and barren land. But this morning was different, because the entire population of Desser had gathered on the surface to witness something that none of them had ever seen in their lives. Soren stood near the front of the crowd, her scales already warming under the harsh light. And beside her, Yuna shifted nervously as she monitored the data streaming from the processors in orbit. The Koreshi around them were quiet, their eyes fixed on the sky, and Soren could feel the tension radiating from every one of them like heat from the suns. Above, Dar Minji Seo's voice came through the communication systems, steady and calm despite the magnitude of what they were about to attempt. All processors are in position and fully charged, she announced. We are ready to begin atmospheric seeding on your signal. Elder Magistrate Kefren stood at the very front of the gathering, his ancient body draped in ceremonial robes that had not been worn since the last generation that remembered rain. And he looked up at the clear blue sky and spoke in a voice that carried across the assembled crowd. For 400 years, our people have survived by rationing every drop of water we could find, he said. We have watched our lakes dry up and our rivers turn to dust. And we have buried countless generations who never knew what it felt like to be truly satisfied by a drink of water. He paused, and Soren saw moisture gathering in the corners of his eyes. Today, we place our faith in strangers who came to us from across the stars, Catherine continued. Strangers who are here because one of our own gave water to a dying alien when she had almost none for herself. He turned to look at Soren, and she felt the weight of every eye in the crowd fall upon her. Soren saved a life that day, Catherine said. And in doing so, she may have saved all of us. And though I questioned her judgment at the time, I now see that she understood something that I have forgotten in all my years of survival. The old Karishi's voice trembled with emotion. She understood that kindness is never wasted. Even when it seems foolish, even when it costs us everything we have. He turned back to face the sky and raised his hand. Begin the activation, he commanded high above Varethka. The atmospheric processors hummed to life, drawing moisture from the deep aquifers that the human drilling teams had tapped and sending it spiraling into the upper atmosphere where specially designed chemicals would encourage cloud formation. For several long minutes, nothing happened. The crowd grew restless, and Soren heard muttering from those around her, voices filled with doubt and disappointment. It did not work, someone said. The humans lied to us. Another voice added, even Vareth, who had come to witness the event despite his reservations, shook his head slowly. I told you this was impossible, he said to no one in particular, but Yuna was staring at her data display with an expression of intense concentration. And she grabbed Soren's arm suddenly. Look, she whispered. Look at the sky. Soren looked up, and her breath caught in her throat on the horizon. Something was changing. The endless blue was darkening in patches, wisps of white and gray forming where before there had been nothing but empty air. And as the crowd watched in stunned silence, the wisps grew larger and thicker until they became something that the Koreshi had only ever seen in ancient pictures. Clouds, real clouds, spreading across the sky like a blanket being drawn over the burning suns. The crowd gasped as one, and Soren heard several Koreshi cry out in wonder and disbelief. Is this real? She asked Yuna. Her voice barely a whisper. Yuna smiled through the tears streaming down her face. It is real, she said. Keep watching. The clouds continued to gather, blocking more and more of the harsh sunlight, until the temperature began to drop and the air grew cooler than Soren had ever felt it during daylight hours. And then the first drop fell. It landed on Soren's outstretched hand, a single bead of water that seemed to appear from nowhere, and she stared at it in disbelief as more drops began to fall around. Her rain was falling on Varethka's Crowd erupted in chaos as the drops became a shower, and the shower became a downpour. Water falling from the sky in quantities that no living Karishi had ever witnessed. Some of them fled in terror, not understanding what was happening, but most of them stayed, lifting their faces to the sky and opening their mouths to catch the water on their tongues. Children laughed and screamed with joy as they splashed in the puddles that formed on the ancient cracked earth, not knowing that they were doing something that no Karishi child had done in 4 centuries. Elders fell to their knees and wept. Overwhelmed by the sight of water falling freely from above, Karan stood motionless in the center of it all, his scales glistening with moisture. And when Soren looked at him, she saw that the old magistrate was crying harder than she had ever seen anyone cry. Yuna squeezed Soren's hand tightly, and Soren squeezed back. And together they stood in the rain as a world was reborn around them. Downpour lasted for nearly an hour before the processors cycled down to conserve resources. And when it finally stopped, the surface of Varithka was transformed. Water pooled in every depression and hollow. Streams trickled down slopes that had been dry since before Soren's grandmother was born. And the air smelled fresh and clean in a way that Soren had never experienced in the days that followed. The Council of Wells voted to formally invite humanity to establish a permanent embassy on Varithka, offering full partnership in rebuilding their world. Rather than charity or dependence, Admiral Cho accepted the offer and announced that human engineers would remain on the planet for as long as it took to fully restore the water cycle. When the Admiral offered Yuna a promotion that would require her to leave Varithka and return to human space, she declined. "I want to stay here," Yuna told him during their conversation, which Soren witnessed from nearby. "They gave me water when they had nothing, and I want to see what their world becomes. And I want to be here when their rivers flow again." The Admiral smiled and granted her request. Years passed, and Varithka continued to change. Lakes formed where there had been only dust, and plants began to grow on the surface for the first time in centuries. And the Karishi population began to expand as water became abundant rather than scarce. Soren became an ambassador, working alongside humans to build the partnership that would define the future of both their species. And Yuna remained at her side through all of it. One afternoon, they stood together on the shore of a lake that had not existed when they first met, watching Karishi children swim and play in water that fell regularly from the sky. Young Karishi approached Soren with wide, curious eyes. "Ambassador," the child said, "will you tell us the story again? The one about how the rain came back?" Soren looked at Yuna and smiled. "It begins with a single cup of water," she said. "A long time ago, a water scout found a stranger dying in the desert. And even though she had almost nothing for herself, she gave that stranger everything she had." "Why?" the child asked. Soren thought about the question for a moment, remembering the choice she had made all those years ago in the wreckage of a crashed ship. "Because kindness is never wasted," she answered finally. "Even when it costs us everything, even when we cannot see what it will become, kindness plants seeds that grow into things we cannot imagine." The child nodded thoughtfully and ran off to rejoin the others in the water. Yuna took Soren's hand as they watched the children play. "Do you ever regret it?" Yuna asked. "The choice you made that day." Soren listened to the sound of children laughing and splashing, sounds that would have been impossible on the world she grew up in. And she felt the cool breeze carrying moisture from the lake across her scales. "Never," she said, "not for a single moment," above them. Clouds drifted across the sky of Varithka, promising more rain to come. And the desert that had once stretched endlessly in every direction was slowly becoming a memorial, because one person gave water to a stranger. The months that followed the arrival of the human fleet transformed Varithka in ways that no Karishi could have imagined. And Soren found herself at the center of changes that would reshape the future of her entire species. Human Engineers and scientists descended from the orbiting ships to study every aspect of the planet, from the composition of its atmosphere to the structure of its underground water systems. And they worked alongside Koreshi scholars who had spent their lives trying to understand why their world had become a desert DR. Minji Seo was the leader of the terraforming team, a small woman with sharp eyes and a quick smile who spoke the Koreshi language through her translator with more warmth than any other human Soren had met. Your planet was not always like this, Minji explained during one of their many meetings in the research chambers that had been established beneath the surface. Our analysis shows that Varathka had a functioning water cycle for millions of years before something disrupted it. She showed them images and data on glowing screens that seemed like magic to the Koreshi. And she pointed to a region on the far side of the planet where ancient volcanic activity had released gases into the atmosphere. This event changed the chemical balance of your atmosphere, Minji said. The moisture that should have formed clouds and fallen as rain instead escaped into space. And over centuries your surface water evaporated. And your world became what it is today. Catherine studied the data with eyes that had grown brighter. Since the humans arrived, can it be reversed? He asked Minji. Nodded slowly. We believe so, she said. We want to deploy atmospheric processors in orbit that will capture moisture and seed clouds. And we will use reflectors to reduce the surface temperature so the water does not evaporate as quickly. And we will drill deep into the planet's crust to tap frozen aquifers that have been trapped underground for thousands of years. The plan was ambitious beyond anything the Koreshi had ever attempted, and many of them struggled to believe it was possible. Not everyone welcomed the human presence a warrior named Vorath had become the voice of those who distrusted the aliens. And he gathered followers in the outer settlements who believed that the humans were conducting a slow invasion. They make us dependent on their water and their technology, Vorath argued in the public forums where Koreshi debated the future of their world. And when we cannot survive without them, they will demand payment. And that payment will be Varathka itself. His words found fertile ground among those who had survived the drought by trusting no one. And tensions grew as the months past the breaking point came when Varath's followers sabotaged one of the drilling sites. Destroying equipment and setting back the project by weak Soren was furious when she heard the news. And she confronted Varath in the tunnels near his settlement with her scales raised and her claws extended. You are destroying our only chance at survival, she shouted it. Himdrath did not back down. I am protecting our people from a threat you refuse to see, he growled back. These humans come with gifts and smiles, but no species travels across the stars to help strangers without expecting something in return. Before Soren could respond, Una stepped between them. The human had followed Soren without her knowledge. And now she faced Vorath with a calmness that seemed impossible given the anger in the air. You are right to be suspicious, Una said. And her words surprised everyone present. Trust must be earned. And we have not yet earned yours. Vorath narrowed his eyes. Then, why should I believe anything you say? Una reached for her data device and projected images into the air between them. Images of a world that was green and blue and beautiful. This is Earth, she said. My home and the place where my species was born. And I want to show you something important about our history. The images changed, showing a planet choked with smoke and poison. Its waters dark and its skies gray. 200 years ago, we nearly destroyed our world, Una continued. We poisoned our air and our water. We burned our forests and drained our oceans. And millions of people died because of our own foolishness. Vorath watched in silence as the images continued, showing humans working to rebuild what they had broken. Planting trees and cleaning rivers and slowly healing the wounds they had inflicted on their planet. We understand what it means to face extinction, Una said. We understand the fear of watching your world die around you. And we understand the desperation that makes you distrust anyone who offers help." She stepped closer to Varth, and her voice softened. "We are not here to conquer you," she said. "We are here because one of your people gave water to a stranger who was dying in the desert. And my species does not forget that kind of kindness. And we will not rest until we have repaid the debt we owe." Varth was quiet for a long time. His expression unreadable. "Words are easy," he finally said. "Actions are what matter." "Then watch our actions," Una replied. "Watch what we do, and judge us by our deeds rather than your fears." The confrontation did not end the resistance entirely, but something shifted in the days that followed. Varth did not join the human efforts, but he stopped actively opposing them, and his followers slowly drifted away as they saw the changes taking place across their world. Soren stood with Una on the surface one evening, watching the atmospheric processors being assembled in orbit, their lights twinkling like new stars against the darkness. "Do you really think this will work?" Soren asked. Una looked at the sky and smiled. "Minji says the processors will be ready to activate within the week," she said. "If everything goes according to plan, your world will experience something it has not seen in 400 years. Soren tried to imagine rain falling from the sky, water touching her scales without her having to ration it or measure it or fear its absence. And she found that she could not quite picture it. "I have never seen rain," she admitted quietly. Una reached down and took her hand, a gesture of friendship that Soren had come to understand over the months they had spent together. "You will," Una promised. "Soon, you will." The processors continued their assembly through the night, and across Varathka the Koreshi watched and waited and hoped. Everything they had worked for was about to be tested. Everything they had believed impossible was about to become real. 3 weeks passed after Una sent her signal into the void, and life in Nesser continued much as it always had, with rationing and thirst and the slow grinding despair that had become as familiar to the Kirishi as breathing. Soren had not been exiled as she had feared, but she had been stripped of her position as a water scout and assigned to work in the deepest tunnels where the air was thick and the labor was hard. And she accepted her punishment without complaint because she knew it could have been far worse. Una remained in Nesser as something between a guest and a prisoner, watched constantly by guards who did not trust her, but who had been ordered to keep her alive until her people responded to her message. Most of the Kirishi avoided the alien, treating her as a curiosity at best and a threat at worst. But some of the younger ones had grown curious enough to approach her, and Una had begun spending time with the children of Nesser, telling them stories about her home world. Soren sometimes paused in her work to listen from a distance as Una described things that sounded impossible. She spoke of vast bodies of water called oceans that stretched from horizon to horizon, so large that a person could travel for days without seeing land. And the children listened with wide eyes and open mouths, unable to imagine such abundance. She spoke of creatures called fish that lived their entire lives submerged in water, breathing it through special organs. And the children laughed because surely she was making up fairy tales to entertain them. She spoke of frozen water called ice that fell from the sky in white flakes during something called winter. And the children shook their heads in disbelief, because such things could not possibly be real. But Soren watched Una's face as she told these stories, and she saw no deception there, only a deep sadness that seemed to grow every time she looked at the rationed cups of water the children received for their daily meals on the 23rd day after the signal was sent. Everything changed. The sensors that monitored the space around Varathka began screaming with alarms, and the council was summoned in a panic as reports came flooding in from the observation posts on the surface. Objects were approaching the planet, hundreds of them, More than anyone had ever seen, the news spread through Desser like fire through dry grass. And within hours the entire city was gripped by terror. Because the Karishi had no military and no weapons capable of defending against an invasion from Spaskithren summoned Yuna to the council chamber. And his voice shook with barely contained rage when he spoke. "What have you done?" he demanded. "You have brought destroyers to our world. And now your people will take what little we have left." Yuna stood calmly before the council despite the fear that surrounded her. "Please," she said, "wait and see before you judge, because I told you my people would want to help. And I believe they have come to do exactly that. Why should we trust you?" Another council member shouted. Soren pushed her way through the crowd before she could stop herself. And she stood beside Yuna and faced the council with her scales raised in defiance. "Because she has given us no reason not to trust her," Soren said. "She has lived among us for 3 weeks and caused no harm. And she has treated our children with kindness. And she has never lied to us about anything." The chamber erupted in argument. But before the council could reach any decision, a new report arrived from the surface. The objects had entered orbit around Varathka. And they were not warships. They were tankers and freighters and massive machines that hummed with power. And painted on their hulls was a symbol that Yuna recognized immediately. "That is the flag of the Terran Cooperative," she said. And her voice trembled with emotion. "Those are my people. And they have come to help." A transmission crackled through the communication systems of Desser. And a voice spoke in a language that Yuna's device quickly translated for all to hear. "This is Admiral Dae-Yung Cho of the Terran Cooperative Humanitarian Fleet," the voice said. "We received Specialist Yuna Park's distress signal and her report about the people of Varathka. And when the Colonial Senate learned that your world gave water to save one of our own, despite your own desperate circumstances, they voted unanimously to respond." The chamber was silent. Every Karishi frozen in disbelief. "We have brought supplies," the Admiral continued. "Our first tanker is beginning its descent now, carrying enough fresh water to supply your largest settlement for 1 full year. And more will follow." Soren felt her legs weaken beneath her, and she reached out to steady herself against the wall as the words sank into her mind. Fresh water. Enough for a year, falling from the sky like the rain Yuna had described. It seemed impossible. And yet the sensors confirmed it as a massive vessel broke through the atmosphere and descended toward the surface of Varathka. Council rushed to the observation platforms near the city entrance. And Soren followed with Yuna at her side. And together, they watched as the tanker landed on the cracked desert floor and opened its holds to reveal more water than any living Koreshi had ever seen in one place elder. Magistrate Catherine stood at the front of the crowd, his ancient body trembling as he watched human workers begin to set up distribution systems. "Why?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Why would your people do this for strangers they have never met?" Yuna looked at Soren before she answered. "Because you helped me first," she said simply. "You gave me water when you had almost none. And my people do not forget kindness like that." Catherine turned to face the human. And Soren saw something in his eyes that she had never seen before in all her years of knowing him. Hope. "This is a miracle," he said. But Yuna shook her head. "This is only the beginning," she said. "The tankers will keep your people alive for now. But they are not a permanent solution, and my people have something else planned. Something that will change Varathka forever if you will allow it." "What do you mean?" Soren asked. Yuna smiled. And it was the first time Soren had seen her look truly happy since the day she crashed on their world. "We are going to teach your planet how to reign again," she said. Soren did not understand what that meant, but she felt something stir in her chest that she had not felt in years. Something that had been buried so deep she had almost forgotten it existed. For the first time in her life, Soren allowed herself to believe that the future might be different from the Past the ships continued to arrive throughout the night, filling the sky with lights that outshone the stars. And the Koreshi gathered on the surface to watch as their world began to change around them. The underground city of Desser had been carved from stone over countless generations, and its tunnels stretched deep beneath the surface of Varathka, where the temperature remained bearable and the last reserves of water could be protected from the merciless suns above. Soren had grown up in these tunnels, and she knew every passage and chamber, as well as she knew the patterns of her own scales. But she had never walked through her home feeling like a criminal until now. Guards at the entrance had taken one look at the strange creature on her back and immediately summoned the Council of Wells. And within the hour, Soren found herself standing in the great chamber where the leaders of her people made decisions about life and death. The council sat on elevated platforms, carved from the same red stone that made up all of Desser, and their faces were hard and unreadable as they studied the alien that now lay on a mat in the center of the room. Elder Magistrate Catherine was the oldest of them all. His scales faded to a dull gray from centuries of rationed water, and his eyes burned with a cold fury that made Soren want to look away. "You gave water to this thing," Catherine said, and his voice echoed through the chamber like a judgment already. Soren stood straight, despite the exhaustion that threatened to collapse her legs beneath her. "I did," she answered. "How much?" "Nearly a week of my rations." The murmur that spread through the gathered crowd was like the hiss of sand in a windstorm, and Soren felt the weight of their disapproval pressing down on her from every direction. Ankren leaned forward on his platform, and his claws scraped against the stone with a sound that made Soren's spine tighten. "Do you understand what you have done?" he demanded. "You have stolen water from your own people and given it to an outsider who may be a threat to everything we have built here." The creature was dying, Soren said. "I could not walk away." "You should have walked away," another council member snapped. "That is exactly what you should have done. Because every drop of water on this world belongs to the Koreshi and no one else." The argument continued around her, voices rising and falling as the council debated what to do with both Soren and the stranger she had saved. And all the while the creature lay still on the mat, breathing slowly, alive only because of what Soren had sacrificed. Then the creature stirred. The chamber fell silent as the alien pushed itself up on trembling arms and looked around at the sea of scaled faces staring back at it. And Soren saw fear flash across its features before being replaced by something that looked almost like determination. A device on the creature's wrist flickered to life, and when it opened its mouth, the words that came out were strange and foreign. But a moment later, the device repeated them in the Koreshi language. "My name is Yuna Park," the creature said through the translation device. "I am a geological surveyor from a world called Earth, and my ship malfunctioned during a mapping mission, and I crashed on your planet by accident." Catherine's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Why should we believe anything you say?" "Alien." Yuna looked around the chamber, taking in the carved stone walls and the dim lighting and the faces of the Koreshi, who watched her with a mixture of fear and hostility. And then she turned to Soren. "You saved me," Yuna said. "You gave me water when I was dying, and I need to understand why." Soren did not know how to answer at first, because she was not entirely sure herself. But she met the alien's strained round eyes and spoke the truth. "Because you needed it," she said simply. Yuna was quiet for a long moment, and something changed in her expression, something that Soren could not quite identify, but that seemed important. "Tell me about your world," Yuna said. "Tell me why water is so precious here." And so they told her about the drought that had lasted 400 years, about the underground lakes that had once sustained millions and now barely supported thousands, about the children who grew up learning to measure their lives in cups and drops, They told her about the rationing and the suffering and the slow death that awaited their entire species if nothing changed. When they finished, Una sat in silence, and Soren saw that her eyes had grown wet with moisture, a display that seemed impossibly wasteful until she realized that the alien was crying. "Where I come from," Una said finally. "Water falls from the sky." The council erupted in outrage. "She mocks us," one member shouted. "She tells lies to insult our suffering." "Water does not fall from the sky," Catherine growled. "Such a thing is impossible." But Una shook her head slowly. "It is called rain," she said. "On Earth, water evaporates from our oceans and rises into the atmosphere and forms clouds. And then it falls back down as rain, and it happens so often that sometimes people complain about it." The Koreshi stared at her as if she had just claimed that stones could sing or that fire could freeze. And Soren saw the disbelief written across every face in the chamber. "You lie," Catherine said. "I do not lie," Una replied. And her voice carried a weight that made even the elder magistrate pause. "And I need you to understand something else, because it is important." She turned to look at Soren again. "That woman gave me water when she had almost none for herself," Una said. "She risked her own life to save a stranger from a species she had never seen before. And where I come from, that kind of debt cannot be ignored." "What do you want?" Catherine asked. His voice heavy with suspicion. Una took a deep breath. "Let me send a distress signal to my people," she said. "If they come for me, I will tell them about Varethka and the Koreshi and what you are facing here. And I cannot promise anything, but I believe they will want to help." The council argued for hours after that, debating the risks and the possibilities and the chance that the alien was lying about everything. But in the end, they agreed to let her send her signal because they had nothing left to lose. Soren watched as Una activated her communication device and spoke words into it that the translator could not fully capture. And at the end of the message, she added something that made Soren's breath catch in her throat. "They gave me water when they had none," Una said. "We owe them everything." The signal vanished into the stars, and the chamber fell silent. Catherine looked at Soren with an expression she could not read. "You have gambled all of our futures on a stranger's promise," he said. "I hope for your sake and ours that your faith was not misplaced." Soren did not answer. Because she did not know what to say, she had acted on instinct when she gave water to the dying alien in the desert. And now that instinct had grown into something much larger than she had ever imagined. All she could do was wait and hope that the stranger from Earth would keep her word. The twin suns of Varethka burned without mercy across the endless desert. And Soren had learned long ago that the wasteland did not forgive those who lingered too long beneath their gaze. She moved quickly across the cracked earth, her scaled feet finding the familiar paths between the stone formations that offered brief moments of shade. And her water pouch hung light against her hip, a constant reminder that she had perhaps 2 days of survival left before she needed to return to Vesser. Soren was a water scout, one of the few Koreshi brave enough or desperate enough to venture into the dead lands in search of moisture. And though she had found nothing but dust and bones for the past 3 cycles, she continued her work because her people had no other choice. The Koreshi were dying, and everyone knew it. 400 years had passed since the last rain fell on Varethka, and the underground lakes that once sustained their civilization had shrunk to mere puddles. And children grew up learning to survive on cups of water that would not satisfy a moment of thirst on any other world. Soren stopped beneath an outcropping of red stone and allowed herself a single sip from her pouch, feeling the precious liquid slide down her throat. And she closed her eyes and remembered the stories her grandmother used to tell about the time before the drought, when water flowed in rivers across the surface and the Koreshi swam in great lakes beneath open skies. Those days were gone, and Soren had never believed they would return. She was about to continue her patrol when something in the distance caught her attention. A glint of metal reflecting the harsh sunlight. And she narrowed her eyes and studied the horizon where a dark shape lay crumpled against the sand. Soren approached carefully, her hand moving to the knife at her belt, because the wasteland sometimes attracted scavengers and raiders who preyed on lone travelers. But as she drew closer, she realized that the shape was not a creature at all. It was a vessel of some kind. A machine that had fallen from the sky. The craft was small, barely larger than a Koreshi dwelling pod, and its surface was scorched and torn as if it had burned through the atmosphere before crashing into the desert floor. And smoke still rose from cracks in its hull, though the fires had long since died. Soren circled the wreckage slowly, searching for any sign of danger. And when she found an opening in the side of the vessel, she peered inside and saw something that made her scales tighten with shock. A creature lay slumped against the interior wall, and it was unlike anything Soren had ever seen in her life. The being had smooth skin instead of scales, pink and soft and covered with terrible blisters where the suns had burned it, and thin strands of dark material grew from the top of its head, and its body was wrapped in a suit of some foreign fabric that had been torn in several places. Soren knew that other species existed beyond Varethka because traders occasionally spoke of distant worlds and strange peoples. But the Koreshi had been isolated for so long that such tales seemed like myths. And now one of those myths lay dying before her eyes. The creature stirred weakly, and Soren saw that its lips were cracked and bleeding, and its eyes fluttered open for just a moment before closing again. And a sound escaped its mouth that might have been a word in some language. She did not understand. Soren recognized the signs immediately because she had seen them many times among her own people. The creature was dying of thirst. She stood frozen in the entrance of the crashed vessel, and her mind raced through the terrible calculation that every Koreshi learned before they could walk. And she looked at the water pouch on her hip and felt the weight of what remained inside. If she gave water to this stranger, she would not have enough to survive the journey back to Thesser, and she would die in the wasteland just as surely as this creature would die without her help. If she walked away, she would live, and no one would ever know that she had left an unknown being to perish. Alone in the desert, Soren thought about the laws of her people, the strict rules that governed every drop of water on Varthka, and she knew that wasting precious resources on an outsider was a crime that could result in exile or worse. She thought about her family waiting for her in Thesser, her younger brother who depended on her water rations to survive, and her mother whose scales had begun to dull from years of dehydration. She thought about everything she would lose if she made the wrong choice, and then Soren looked at the creature again, at the way its chest rose and fell with shallow, desperate breaths, at the way its fingers twitched as if reaching for something that was not there. And she felt something stir inside her that she could not name. Perhaps it was foolishness, or perhaps it was something her people had forgotten during their long centuries of survival. But Soren found herself kneeling beside the stranger and removing the cap from her water pouch. She lifted the creature's head gently, surprised by how light it felt in her hands, and she pressed the opening of the pouch to its cracked lips and let the water flow. The stranger drank weakly at first, coughing and sputtering as the liquid entered its mouth, and then more eagerly as its body recognized what it was receiving. And Soren watched nearly half of her remaining supply disappear down the creature's throat. When she finally pulled the pouch away, the stranger's eyes opened again, and this time they focused on Soren's face with something like awareness. The creature made a sound, a soft noise that carried a tone Soren understood, even without knowing the words. And she realized that it was trying to thank her. Soren did not know how to respond, so she simply nodded and continued to hold the stranger's head as its eyes closed once more and its breathing steadied into something resembling sleep. She stayed there for a long time, watching the creature rest, and she tried not to think about what she had just done or what it would cost her when the suns began to sink toward the horizon and the air grew slightly cooler. Soren made her decision. She could not carry the vessel, but she could carry the creature, with strength born from years of hard labor in the underground tunnels of Desser. Soren lifted the stranger onto her back and secured it with straps from the crashed vessel. And she began the long walk home across the darkening desert. Every step reminded her that she was carrying extra weight, while her water supply dwindled to almost nothing. And every breath reminded her that she might be walking toward her own death. But Soren did not stop, and she did not turn back. She had made her choice, and now she would see it through as the stars emerged above Varethke, and the twin suns finally released their grip on the land. Soren thought about what the elders would say when she arrived with an alien creature on her back and an empty water pouch at her hip. She thought about the punishment that awaited her and the shame she would bring upon her family, and somewhere beneath all of that fear and doubt, she thought about the look in the stranger's eyes when it had realized what she had done for it. And she wondered if she had just made the worst mistake of her life or the most important decision she would ever make. The walls of Desser appeared on the horizon, just as Soren's legs began to fail her, and she pushed forward with the last of her strength, knowing that whatever came next would change everything. She had given water to a stranger from the stars. Now she would face the consequences.